Okay, so we are live streaming on YouTube. So if you wanna watch this again, you then can go on our Seneca CPD YouTube channel and the recording will be there. Yep, working. Okay, cool. All right, so let me just give you a quick explanation of how this is gonna go today, and then now let Sam start. So first thing, if you don't know me yet, my name is Flavia. I am the chief scientist at Seneca Learning, who organizes all of these conferences and TeachMeets. If you're not on Seneca yet, go on Seneca. We have a whole load of free resources for teachers and for students. It's been really great during the lockdown and now back in school as well. Over 4 million people using our platform for free, and that's really great. So if you're not there yet, please go and get a look at our resources. I'm gonna put the website on the chat here. And we have a lot of CPD courses as well, so you can do them online. Even Sam has one that he's written about his previous book, so Education Exposed 1. And there will be a CPD course for Education Exposed 2 coming at some point, probably early next year, I say. So a lot of their courses by Oliver Caviglioli and Kate Jones and Michael Giles. Sorry. A lot of things, everything for free. So the way today is gonna work, we'll be using the chat. So please do write your questions for Sam on the chat. You won't be able to talk to him on the microphone because it will be chaos with hundreds of people, but you do type on the chat and then I'm gonna ask him the questions in the end. So don't forget to type your questions in the chat so he can answer. If you are on Twitter, go on Twitter and use Seneca CPD, hashtag Seneca CPD, so that everybody can talk to each other on Twitter and you can say what you liked, what you thought about this conversation, and then people can talk to you. Sam's profile is on the slides there, so you can tag him and then I'm sure he'll be able to answer you and carry on the conversation. Mine is at Flavia Bellum PhD and Seneca is at Seneca Learn. So please tag everybody and use the hashtag so we can carry on the conversation. Okay, so do you have any questions? Anybody has any questions? Just give you 20 seconds to write on the chat. Do you have any questions? No? Okay, brilliant. So let's start. Sam?
Brilliant. Well, thank you ever so much to Seneca for having me back again. And a very different topic this time, which is to focus on behaviour. For those of you watching who don't know who I am, my name's Sam Strickland. I'm the principal of the Duston School in Northamptonshire, and I've been there since April of 2017. The school itself has gone from being in the 90% of all schools nationally to in the top 20% of all schools nationally, and the 27th most improved school in the country for our GCSE outcomes in 2019, and in the top 5% of all schools in the country for our A-level outcomes in the summer series of 2019. But a huge thank you to so many of you who are giving up an hour of your evening at the tail end of a week, at the end of what has been probably one of the busiest and most challenging half terms of our careers. And no doubt things will be even more interesting as we go back after half term in either a week and a bit's time or 2 and a bit weeks time. But it's very telling that so many people want to hear about behaviour. And it is a topic that I am hugely passionate about. I've been very privileged to work with Tom Bennett on in terms of nationally delivering training and actually being on the receiving end of training from Tom as well. But it's one that we're all striving for in terms of trying to improve and to get on top of. And that's irrespective of whether we've got 20 or 30 years of experience in this profession or 2 or 3 minutes of experience within this profession. So this talk is entitled They Behave for Me, Liberating Teachers So They Can Teach. And I'm going to go through kind of 2 aspects of behaviour. One is the whole school aspect, what can be done in an institutional sense, and then what can you do as a class-based teacher. And in all honesty, within the time frame we've got, we're probably only going to really touch the sides with regards to behaviour. We could spend 2 or 3 days looking at this. But something I want you to have in your mind as you're kind of listening to me talk and hopefully make sense is, what is the interrelationship? And it's a question to have in your heads between what I would define as the mothership, the school, and the satellites, all the different departments and subject areas and team areas and members of staff that make up the school. Is that relationship really strong, really clear, and there's a real sense of direction from the top all the way down? Or is it what you'd almost describe as quite disparate? And that's kind of the two ends of the scale. So some misconceptions regarding behaviour. Well, the first one is that routines and order and structure, and this is something I'm going to stress a lot throughout this talk, are deemed to inhibit teacher autonomy and teacher creativity. And I think there's a falsehood to that claim. My experience of where you have habitual routines is that this actually frees up teachers to be far more creative and far more autonomous in the teaching that they're engaging in, because they don't have to think about, you know, lesson in, lesson out. How does my lesson start? How does it end? How do we transition from one thing to the next? A second misconception is, and it was peddled out amongst a number of the MPQs over the last decade, is this whole notion that good lesson planning automatically results in positive behavior. And you know, there's kind of two examples I can think of here. You've got the teacher who goes from one school and is deemed to be outstanding, and then moves to another school and is deemed to be requiring improvement, because actually the culture of the school in one school allows that teacher to shine and in another doesn't. And then in the other kind of guys here with good planning, I could have an amazing lesson planned. I could have David Beckham coming in to do kick-me-ups and the Pope to give a motivational speech, but it won't matter one jot if the pupils aren't going to listen and behave. We then have that toxic staff room line, and I've been on the receiving end of this, and no doubt many of you sat listening to me talk have as well. The "they behave for me" line, when you are kind of bearing out your soul to somebody else about, you know, 9x1 on a Wednesday 5 that have just torn you to shreds. That line is just so unhelpful. But equally, when you have those lines spouted in staff rooms, what does it say about the school's culture? We also have a misconception that behaviour is solely the teacher's responsibility and that the senior team have no role to play. And I really do challenge that. If we're going to really drive behaviour, the senior team and from the head down have to play a pivotal role. And there is a very specific reason that behaviour forms one part, indeed quite a big part, of the head teacher standards. And then the other misconception is this idea that somehow we should try and earn respect, but you start kind of at ground zero, there's no respect at all, and you've got to earn it from your pupils. Yes, there's a degree to which we do need to earn respect in terms of pupils buying into us, but there should be a baseline of respect for us as the experts in the classroom and indeed within the school. So my new book, Education Exposed 2, In Pursuit of the Halcyon Dream, focuses on, in one section, the opening section of the book, about the Halcyon Dream. And really, it boils down to this simple question: why did you become a teacher? And it's a question that's asked of anybody that wants to enter this profession, to engage with ITT or a PGCE. And often it's asked at interviews, actually, what inspired you to become a teacher? And I could give a very bad advertisement for teaching about 70, 80-hour weeks and bad working conditions. But actually, when we kind of drill it down, the answers, broadly speaking, tend to be fairly similar. And they're kind of, I guess, X Factor style answers, but they're very genuine. It's that people want to make a difference. They want to help children. They want to inspire children. And it's a love of your subject or subjects in terms of your teaching, and trying to make that kind of intellectual academic difference to our pupils, whether that's at a primary level or a secondary level or at post 16. Or indeed in any other setting. There is that burning passion for our subject. But then we have things that get in the way of what we're actually trying to achieve. Workload, endless priorities, the classic lines of doing it for Ofsted, a lack of direction from above, poor communication, natural selection in the school. But I think the key one that really undermines teachers from this halcyon dream is behaviour, which is obviously the purpose of this talk. And there are some issues around behaviour. Behaviour training is short in supply. It's not something that really, probably until the last 18 months, has really been pushed. And that's not to say that there haven't been behaviour advocates in a national sense. Of course there have. But I think about my own career. The last time I received actual behaviour training was my teacher training. I had 2 half-an-hour workshops. One was on the use of voice, and the other one was on the use of having palms down and raising the kind of Buzz Lightyear, this is before Buzz Lightyear, eyebrow up. And that was it. And then you are assumed to be able to, command the respect of pupils and keep them in check. Nationally, about 23% of teachers believe that behaviour isn't good, and that's across the sector. And if you take the Ofsted narrative that 90% of schools are good or better, that's alarming. Most of our behaviour management tends to be reactive, not proactive. We don't tend to be on a front foot. We tend to react to issues as they arise, which means that we're always chasing our tail. And I appreciate there is a degree to with which behaviour management will be reactive, but it's how do we get that balance right? And then the final kind of issue here, and there are many others, but these are the ones that I'm going to reference, is that we just assume that behaviour is there, that it's something that pupils can do, that teachers can do, and it's something that isn't taught or isn't trained. So kind of our starting point then with this is that poor behaviour ultimately is kryptonite to our schools. If we haven't got behaviour where it needs to be, there's absolutely no point in talking about the curriculum. There's absolutely no point in talking about classroom practice. There's absolutely no point in talking about wider professional development from a subject-specific perspective if this isn't right. Because you'll always have thrown back, if you're a leader, a middle leader, or indeed a class teacher, that because they don't behave, we can't do all those wonderful things that we'd like to do. And that's an absolutely fair comeback when behaviour isn't where it needs to be within our schools. So it's really important, if we start with the school element, about what could be given back so teachers can teach. How do we free up teachers to teach? How do we keep teaching the core thing, teaching? Because ultimately, if we take behaviour out for 1 second, the magic in our schools happens in the classroom. The biggest difference to our pupils happens in the classroom. Our results as schools, as teachers, as departments, happens in the classroom. And if we are doing things that detract or defer from what is happening in the classroom, then I think we really need to take a long, hard look in the mirror and question why we're doing what we're doing. Ultimately, behaviour is going to be, and it is, I would argue, our number one driver. It's going to define our school culture. It's going to absolutely determine whether pupils can achieve academically or not. If you think about the Matthew effect, where our more disadvantaged pupils who are behind their more privileged counterparts are already on a back foot, if they're engaging in lessons that are constantly being destroyed and ruined, and actually there's only 15 or 20 minutes of learning in an hour-long lesson taking place, then poor behaviour magnifies that Matthew effect even further. So by working on behaviour and making that a priority, we're trying to reclaim teaching time, which hopefully in a longer term sense means that all of the circus of intervention that we see as we move higher up the school might actually not be as necessary, because the pupils have got that educational grounding lower down the school, which they should have had in the first place anyway. If we're thinking about staff wellbeing, staff welfare, let's forget the Zumba class once a month or the cakes in the staff room. Yeah, they're nice things, of course they are, but ultimately it's about the conditions within our working place. And if, for sake of argument, every single lesson is a living nightmare, or every Wednesday period 5 9x tear me to shreds, my morale, my welfare isn't going to be where my employer would like it to be, where my school would like it to be. And ultimately it will erode away against my confidence. It will make me feel worthless actually as a person, and it might inspire me to leave. So positive behaviour also helps with staff retention. But also it will help with pupil retention to your school as well. Parents talk, parents know, the schools that take behaviour seriously and which don't. So it's a marketing tool for our schools. And where behaviour is poor, you can see the numbers on roll drop. And then of course that has a massive adverse effect on your funding, which then sort of perpetuates in a vicious downward spiral. So with behaviour, and Doug Lemov talks about this, you permit what you promote and you promote what you permit. This starts from the top. And I'm saying this as a principle myself. The standard that I want my school to be judged by, to operate by, is one that I have to promote as their heads. So really simply, shirts. I want shirts tucked in my school. Okay, and that's probably the same in most schools. It's a very small, very minor uniform matter. However, if I continually walk past pupils who've always got their shirts untucked and never ever raise an eyebrow, or more importantly, challenge those pupils, because I am trying to promote what I permit and permit what I promote, then I'm absolutely kind of foghorning to everybody that my standard around uniform doesn't matter. And that will then mean, whether I believe this or not, that staff will cease to care about that particular rule, and absolutely pupils will as well. And you'll hear the lines of, well, Mr. Strickland didn't really care about. So this is massive, and this is a huge starting point, and it does tie into some of the stuff that you might do if you've done an MPQ. But what is it in terms of your moral purpose that you are about, whether you're a class teacher, whether you're a head of department, whether you're a senior leader, whether you're a head? This is huge and not to be underestimated. So the vision for behaviour, first and foremost, behaviour isn't easy, and I'm probably preaching to the converted here, but it requires hard work, hard effort, hard determination, and relentless follow through. Another aspect, though, within the whole notion of behaviour is that we really need to accept that all teachers can improve and all teachers can teach. If we go from a starting point that it's the teacher's fault, that teachers can't do this, that teachers are unable to teach, and actually, if their lessons aren't very good, it must mean that they're rubbish. We're starting from a very, very low starting point in terms of our belief and expectations of what teachers can actually do. The challenge is actually to give those teachers support and training and guidance where they are potentially struggling, if you've got a really watertight system. And that's the first kind of point that you need to get into place. There should be, as part of this vision, though, some clear strategies and clear routines that are either departmentally or institutionally built in. And the other key bit here is there are no tricks. There isn't a magic silver bullet that is magically going to make behaviour better. If there was, we'd all be doing it. You wouldn't be listening to me now, and we wouldn't need to talk about behaviour. So where does it all stem from? How is it driven? Well, it starts with the heads. It should work its way through the senior team, through middle leaders, through teachers, and then through every other member of staff within the school community, irrespective of what their role is within the school. So behaviour is driven by everybody, but with a real clear directional steer from above. And the keys to behaviour, how do we try and change it in the manner and direction that we want? I'm going to start from the bottom here, actually. Teenagers, if we think about teenagers, but actually it does apply to pupils in the primary setting as well, especially as we move up to kind of years 5 and 6. They tend to be quite conformist. They tend to follow, going to this top point, the social norm. If the social norm in my classroom is chaos, then even the good pupils will at some stage test the boundaries and engage in chaotic behaviour in a way that they wouldn't do otherwise. If the social norm, however, is to diligently work hard and to be polite and respectful, then you will stand out like a sore thumb if you're not engaging in that conformist social norm. A challenge is to actually make it cool to behave, to do the right things, to learn, but also to make success in its own right achievable. So if we think about some of the most successful schools nationally, the kind of powerhouse schools, and I'm not going to name who they are, I'll leave that for you to kind of decide for yourselves, but there are common key traits amongst those schools. Firstly, that you have really clear, discernible, visible leadership, which drives the school. There's a real clarity over the culture of the school, which is over communicated, which is underpinned by sky-high expectations and relentless high levels of support, whether that's pastoral and senior support. And then you have got, I know it is a repetition, but it's very deliberate, over communication and well communication of the expectations of the school day in, day out, day in, day out. And ultimately, those powerhouse schools leave nothing to chance. And the key thing here is that behaviour is taught. Behaviour is seen as a subject in its own right, as a curriculum area in its own right. And this is something Tom Bennett passionately talks about. But if you want behaviour to improve, you have to teach it, which I'll come to in a bit. But also those powerhouse schools are underpinned by cast iron routines, which really build in and breed a sense of continuity and consistency in our schools. So some starting points, and this is whether you're a senior leader or a classroom teacher, it applies to both. What's the culture that you want, whether that's in your classroom or within your school? That's the first thing you should really think about in terms of you as a teacher or you as a middle leader or a leader. How do you communicate that culture, both verbally and through the way in which you act and the way in which you teach your culture to your pupils, which then goes into that third point of not just teaching the culture, but maintaining it. And there's a danger with school cultures that we get to a point where culture is where we think it should be. And there's almost a boring element then to the routines and systems we have, because they just tick over and over and over. And we take our foot off the gas. And then suddenly, within a couple of weeks, things start to unpick, because actually, if you leave things, you don't continue to drive it, things can unpick themselves very, very quickly in schools. So the hardest bit and the bit that takes time is the maintenance of the culture that we're trying to achieve. Some approaches I think we do need to be aware of is defining that culture, the norms, the values, the beliefs that we want to see in place. And this is a very kind of MPQSL, MPQH approach. And with MPQH, there is a unit devoted specifically to this. And it sounds very aloof. And if I'm honest, when I did my MPQH, I probably didn't really quite get it. But the mission statement and the vision and the values of the school are so, so important. They shouldn't just be, a piece of paper with them written on. They need to be lived and breathed across your establishment and lived and breathed by everybody. Otherwise, they are meaningless. With that, though, and whether you're, again, a class teacher or a senior leader or indeed a head, what are the lines in the sand? What are your red lines? What are you going to tolerate? And what will you not tolerate within your classroom, your department, your school? And what will be the consequences for those? And this is something we need to give careful thought to. And everybody will come at this from a very different angle, no doubt, in terms of what their red lines look like, what consequences should or shouldn't be put into place. But a number of questions, and I'm not going to give you kind of the answers here, because there probably aren't any answers in terms of every school is different. But these are things to consider. And obviously, this is dependent on your position within the school, within your establishment. But what are your views on exclusions? Do you do them? Do you not? Do you have fixed term? Do you have permanent exclusions? How do you, if you do have exclusions and you believe in them, how do you communicate the approach that you take there? Do you have detentions? Do you not? Are they centralised? Are they not centralised? Is there support from the mothership? Is it left to the satellites? Are detentions tiered so they become progressively longer and seen as being kind of more important in terms of seniority within the school as you move from maybe a class teacher to a head of department to a head of year to an assistant principal? Every school's different, but again, have you given that thought? What about isolation? Where does that happen? Does it happen? Should it not happen? Is it in the booth room, which has been controversial over the last 2 years? Is it in offices? Is it something you don't fundamentally believe in as an individual or a school? How do you lay your classroom out? Now, I appreciate COVID has kind of changed everything. And I would not ordinarily, I would actually espouse the idea of having pupils in rows. That was one of the quickest wins in my own establishment, which helped to change our culture within 3 working days. What about transitions, both between lessons, from break time to lunch time to your next lesson, and as you go into and out of assemblies, and how do you transition from one lesson activities to the next? What are your views on silence? Do you have lineups at the start of the day, after break, after lunch, to pull pupils together? Do you have an on-call system, and who's part of that? Do you have a duty rota for staff that are going to patrol the building to support staff? What about rewards? That's an important element as well of behaviour, but they need to be proportionate and not given out cheaply. Parental engagement's obviously another massive factor here. How do we bring parents on board? How do we get them to buy into our vision? But how do we also, when the chips are down, hold our line and hold our nerve with parents to actually say, these are the rules of the school that you signed up to by agreeing to send your child to this school. And actually, this is what we're about, and we're not going to change your bulk. And what about equipment for pupils? Bags, stationery, pencil cases. Is that something you provide your pupils with? Again, in my own setting, we provide our pupils with a knowledge organizer case, which looks like a laptop bag, and a pencil case with all the stationery that they need. That's very context driven in many regards. But again, it's something else to consider and to think about. And then rules. Where do you stand with rules, and what rules do you have, and how explicit are they? There's an American educationist called Marzano, and he talks about 4 key rules defining school life. He talks about there being quiet when the teacher is talking. I'll come back to that word quiet in a second, sorry. That we should follow directions right away, that we should let others get on with their work, and that we should respect others. And arguably, I don't think there's anything there that's controversial, that you would describe as zero tolerance in kind of the negative connotations that are put out there about zero tolerance. The only word in those 4 rules that I would hone in on is the word quiet, because that leads to, in my opinion, ambiguity. Quiet means different things to different people. And either, and I say this relentlessly to my staff, you either want silence or you want talking in your lessons. And what I've put on the right-hand side for you is a classroom code of conduct that we have in our school, which has our mission statement and our values as a school. And this is in every single classroom in the school. And it's used as kind of a micro script so that we can depersonalize behavior, but it marries into our values and it marries into our behavior system. And it's part of the total consistency approach that my school adopts. But ultimately, what do we want when we're thinking about routines? We want a behavior that is ultimately standardized by you and carried out by the pupils habitually, efficiently, and on cue. And the key for you, whether you're a class teacher or a senior leader, especially if people buy into and believe in routines, is to define what they need to look like, and then to train staff and to train the pupils in how to carry those out effectively. And thinking about routines, you really should be thinking about the entry to lessons and the exit from lessons, the entry and exit to assemblies. Do people sit in silence before the person who's going to talk in assembly talks? How do pupils transition in corridors or transition from lessons, from activities? How do they leave the school? How do they ask for help? Is it hands up? Is it not? And what's your classroom social norm? These are things that you should really give careful consideration to when you're thinking about behaviour. And ultimately, communication is key. And I've already referenced to you the graphic that we have in every room within our school. But how do you formally describe your norms to the pupils? And there are so many opportunities within our school day, school week, school curriculum to teach and promote our norms to our pupils, be it assemblies, tutor times, lessons, general role modelling as we walk around the school, through intentional and consistent language and deliberate practice. We can really drive those norms in our schools. Our use of language is also key. I've given you kind of 2 lines here of this is not how we behave and you're not meeting our expectations. It's about depersonalizing behaviors so that we focus on the behavior and not the individual. But there are many, many ways in which we can communicate and continue to communicate behavior being absolutely important. And the key thing to not do if you're a leader is to reference it in a staff briefing once, think you've done your job, maybe follow up with an email and think it's job done. It absolutely isn't. And we have in my own setting on a 3 weekly cycle, a thing that we drive, and it's the basics basically. So 1 week we will drive uniform, another week we'll drive punctuality, another week we will drive being equipped to lessons, and that's on repeat. So we're trying to sweat the small stuff institutionally. But the key to those routines actually becoming a living and breathing entity is once we've defined what they are, we know what they are, and we can visualize them in our mind. We've then thought really carefully about a lot of those questions I've just presented to you. We then model those routines to our pupils. If you want your class to stand in a line before they enter your classroom, show them how to do it. If you want to stand at the door and meet and greet the pupils and you want them to meet and greet you back, show them how to do it and get them to practice it with you and do it on repeat till it becomes an established habitual norm. And ultimately, routines are going to define your school's social norm, and hopefully for the better. So that's kind of the institutional element, and there are definitely things there that as a class teacher you can take away and absolutely apply to your own teaching. But I want to think now actually about the classroom teacher and what the classroom teacher can do. And if I was delivering this as a live training, interactive training session, as in asking you for feedback, I'd ask you this question, which is, who is your best teacher and why? And broadly speaking, the answers I get whenever I do this are broadly the same. Somebody that was consistent, firm but fair, somebody that wouldn't be messed around, somebody that was passionate, somebody that loved their subject, someone that was full of enthusiasm, someone that invested in us, but somebody who was consistent. They tend to be the kinds of answers that I get back. And again, for you as an individual, where do you sit against your best teacher, the person that really inspired you when you were at school? Where are you against that kind of barometer that you have for defining that best teacher? And as a class teacher, you are a class leader, and we should never absolve ourselves of this responsibility. The school, I hope I've emphasized this enough, has a huge responsibility to drive behavior, but so do class teachers. They are the architect of their own class culture. And I would argue, as a class teacher, you should front load your expectations at the start. When you meet a new class, those first couple of lessons, and certainly the first few minutes of your first lesson, are a defining moment for the relationship or interrelationship you will have with your pupils. And it's very much a bit like with interviews. We make judgments about people within about 3 seconds of meeting somebody, and pupils will do the same with us. So we need to be very clear of what we're about, what we want, how we want it, why we want it, and how we want it yet again. So it's about repeating those expectations and always following through, and having the conviction of our spirit to stop whenever something's not going the way we want it to go, to tactically recalibrate a class when we need to never condone rudeness. That is something you should never, ever condone. Do use positivity. I think there's absolutely a place to be positive with pupils, because we want to inspire them to buy into and believe in you. But equally, I know it's a tactic that some teachers do use, sometimes we tactically ignore. And we think, well, if we leave that behavior alone, do you know what? It won't destroy my lesson. You know, if by leaving it and not challenging it, it won't destroy my lesson. But actually, you should always tactically follow through if there's a behavior that you don't want. And that's about you being the expert. It's picking the time to do that. This is always a big question posed, and it's the idea of, do you issue a consequence or do you issue a correction? And a lot of this will probably be guided by the school behaviour policy that overarches the school that you work in. But something I want you to think about: if you teach 5 lessons a day and you have an average class of 30 pupils in each lesson, and let's just say, for sake of argument, your approach is to give 3 warnings before there's a sanction or a consequence issued. In any one lesson, you could, I'm going to paint a worst case scenario, issue 90 verbal warnings to pupils. In a day, 450 warnings. And in a week, just short of 2,000 warnings, without a single sanction being issued to our pupils. And I think it's just something to ponder on and to think about. And what does that say to our pupils? Because for an individual pupil going through a school day, if that's the system, they could get 15 verbal warnings, have effectively got away with it, and nothing's happened. And again, it's something just to consider. My view is that you should nip issues in the bud, and you should go straight in, deal with a problem, and resolve it there and then. Don't allow it to fester. Don't allow it to bubble. Don't allow it to go on for weeks and weeks and weeks. It will gnaw away at you. It will niggle at you. And if you go back at something 3 weeks or 4 weeks later, the pupil would have forgotten. And absolutely, they would have forgotten about a behavior they might have exhibited 4 weeks ago. You need to deal with a problem there and then. And what you also don't want is for a behavior to manifest itself as the social norm within your classroom. So again, I'm going to repeat something I've already said, but it's absolutely important that you teach the behaviors as a classroom teacher that you want. And that should be part of your teaching norm or MO with your pupils. So some strategies for you as a class-based teacher. And this is by no means an exhaustive list, but these are just some of the strategies that you can adopt in the classroom setting. So this is where pupils aren't doing what you would expect. You can give a closed choice. You could say to a pupil, either you are going to do that now, or you're going to do it at lunchtime. The danger with a closed choice is you have to follow through. If I've said to you, I want you back at lunchtime because you're not going to do it now, and I'm giving you a closed choice here, I need to know that I can have you back at lunchtime with me, that I haven't got a million and one other commitments that are going to prevent me from doing so. But it's one approach, one strategy. You can bracket the behavior. So for sake of argument, you've got 4 pupils on a table, 3 are doing the work that they should, 1 is in no way engaged whatsoever. You can praise the 3 pupils doing what they should be doing and leave out the 4th. And that sometimes is enough to trigger that 4th pupil into life. Time pressure is another approach. You've got 10 minutes, 9x1 to do this activity, this task, this answer, this essay, whatever it might be. And then you repeat the time pressures as you go. You've now got 5 minutes. You've now got 2 minutes. You've now got 1 minute. But with the time pressure, what you shouldn't do, in all honesty, is to, once you get to sort of 5 minutes left to go, oh, actually, I've seen you've not done any work here. I'm going to give you another 15 minutes because we're nowhere near where we should be. Sometimes there might be a rationale behind doing that. If that is a consistent theme, though, in your teaching, the chances are the pupils are going to keep pushing against you in terms of the amount of time that you're giving them. Casual questioning. This is where you know that Johnny, it's always a Johnny, isn't doing the work that they should be doing. Johnny, how's that work going? You know they're not doing it. That's often enough to trigger Johnny into life. You've got the steady stare, which is what I was taught on my PGCE, where you look at the pupil, you raise the eyebrow. That could be enough. A non-verbal signal. So you might point at a pupil, you get their attention, you point at the board to the task they should be doing, point back at the pupil and do like a pen sort of gesture as though you're writing on a pad. Sometimes that works in its own right. If we're talking about a non-COVID universe, I would argue that proximity is another approach where you walk over to a pupil, you look down at the work that they're doing, and then you can engage casually in the, how's that going? Do you need any help? Do you not understand? So it's a non-aggressive way of saying to a pupil, I know you're not on task. Mirroring a pupil, if they're talking really loudly, mirror it. That's often enough for a pupil to realise that they're talking really loudly. If I go back to those Marzano rules, don't engage in ambiguity. Be absolutely clear with what you want, how you want it, why you want it, and the manner that you want it. Surnames. Pupils absolutely love being called by their surname. They feel that it's a grown-up thing. It's a sign of respect. Certainly boys absolutely thrive off it. And to be fair, I worked in an all-girls school for about 5 years. They enjoy being called by their surname as well. But it's a really simple thing to do. And again, if we're in a non-COVID universe, standing at the back of the room and surveying it when the pupil should be on a task or an activity is so powerful, because you can see straight away from the back which pupils are engaged, which are not. And more importantly, especially if this is a room which is sat in rows, they can't see you. They don't know where you are. So kind of to bring this to a conclusion, so to speak, and hopefully I've kept to time. A lot of our reactions to behavior or misbehavior is reactive, and it's thinking really, how can we be proactive in our approach as much as is humanly possible? Where does our culture allow and support us, and where is there consistency? Because consistency is key. And are we all doing whatever the institutional expectation is in the same way? I really do believe you need routines. And the other element here is that pupils must receive feedback for their behavior, whether their behavior is good, bad, or indifferent. You know, today's been a great lesson, folks. You've really risen to the challenge. I knew you could do this. You know, you've just engaged in A-level style work year 9. Amazing. Today, you've not really met my expectations. You've not worked hard enough. But that kind of feedback is really, really important. And some referral points for you if you want to read more about behavior without shamelessly plugging my own books. Tom Bennett's Creating a School Culture, and indeed his new book, Running the Room, which is utterly brilliant, absolutely worth a read. Doug Lamob's Teach Like a Champion. There are loads of strategies in there. The book, for whatever reason, has recently become quite controversial, but actually there's a lot of just common sense driven approaches. Tom Sherrington's work on Rosenshine, if you're a believer and advocate of retrieval practice and routines and systems, is a brilliant, brilliant read. And for free, if you go onto the EEF website, their behaviour interventions are absolutely superb. And that brings kind of my talk to a close.
Hi, Sam. Thank you so much. That was amazing.
Pleasure.
And there were so many questions, really, like 5 minutes in and there were already 5 questions. So people really interested in that topic. So thank you so much for giving that
Pleasure.
presentation. Before we go to the questions, do you want to tell people how to buy your books?
Yeah, so my books are available on Amazon, and also John Catt has got a 50% off sale at the moment. So probably best to go there, to be fair.
Yeah, good. All right, so let's start with some questions. I'm just gonna read them the way that they were coming up because there were a lot of them. So a lot of people on the chat saying that the behavior of the kids has been worse this term than same last year or the year before. So do you have any advice on that?
Yeah, no, I'd agree. I think we've seen more challenging behaviours across school setting when I talk to colleagues in other schools since we've come back. And part of that is that our pupils aren't used to being in school. Part of that is probably that there's a change in systems in school from what we've perhaps had before. The advice would be, if you're a senior leader, not to change too much. And I appreciate that's difficult with COVID because of the COVID restrictions that we have. But actually, if I go back to a lot of the things I talked about in this talk that I've just delivered, it's outlining and being explicitly clear what those expectations institutionally are, taking the time to train the pupils and taking time actually to train teachers in what those new systems and processes are, but then also having real clear follow through. And for those pupils that really will defy the institutional expectations as they stand at the moment, I think there's a question there about taking quite a tough stance, actually, because it goes beyond the pale of normal misbehaviour at the moment into actually a safeguarding element within our schools. And I do think probably the phrase that's often sort of used my way is no nonsense. I think you do with certain things have to be no nonsense. And that's actually about the greater collective good. And that's not to say you need to destroy a pupil, but I do think if a pupil isn't engaging with things as they should be, they need to be sanctioned, but then they need to be given a correctional conversation. That's not restorative. That's actually outlining why that behaviour is so reckless, and involving parents. I think that's absolutely key at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a question from Fleur asking, I'm new at my school and I'm finding it difficult to establish myself with certain groups. Any suggestions?
Yeah, and that's really hard because when you join, there's kind of two experiences when you join a new school. You either have the honeymoon period, which lasts for about 3 weeks, and then the kids try it on, or you get the other end, which is where they try it on from the start because you're new, and what's actually happening there is they're trying to suss out your mettle to see what you're about, and once they buy into you, and this is where I go back to that whole idea of there should be an assumed level of respect, but there often isn't in schools. You actually find that after 3 or 4 weeks you've earned their respect perversely. So on one front, one piece of advice would be to stick at it, which is really hard because in the here and now that just feels like an impossible thing to do. But actually I would take some time, take stock to think, what is it I want within my lessons with those pupils? What are the systems that I want to see in my own classroom setting? What are the routines that I want? And drill those into those pupils. And don't be frightened as a new member of staff if obviously the culture needs to allow for this within a school, to ask for help, to ask for support, to ask even for a senior presence to be in the room at times, not all the time, because what you don't want is they only ever go quiet when a senior leader turns up. But I think just knowing you've got that reassurance of support is important.
Yeah, great. And then from Hannah, what if the routines aren't embedded in the school, but I'm trying to establish them in my classroom? So there's a difference between what you do in the classroom and what the whole school does.
Yeah. And I've worked in an environment like that where there's no routines in the school at all, and apart from different departments and different teachers doing their own thing. I think if they aren't established across the school, so if they're working for you, let's go with that first bit, as the teacher, stick with them. Absolutely stick with them. Share those routines with your immediate team, your department, your head of department. And hopefully you might be able to start to gain traction where other people see those routines in operation and start to emulate and replicate what you're trying to do. And I've worked in an environment where critical mass can actually drive things from a bottom-up level. So I think stick to the spirit of your convictions. If those routines work, share them.
Yep, good. What else? Oh, Emily saying that her school parents are not really buying in the whole routine and behavior. So what does she do?
Yeah, no, and that's the other thing actually with this coming back in September, and I've seen it from my own particular school lens. Parents have been far more critical and quick to criticize things in a way that I don't think they ever have been before, and that's not to say we've never had critical parents before. Of course we have. I think we have to hold strong, and ultimately you need the support of the heads. If you are trying to enforce a school-based policy and you have parents continually trying to undermine that, then there needs to be a communication and a message from above to parents to outline exactly what the school's about, why those systems are there. And the why is really important. This is about allowing pupils to learn, allowing pupils to be safe, allowing staff to be safe. Obviously, you're operating in a new climate of COVID kind of everywhere, but nowhere at the same time. But I think it needs that high level institutional support to support staff. Because you inevitably reach a glass ceiling in terms of trying to back concerns with parents, and they go from concerns to formal complaints.
Yeah, which is a problem then. Yeah. There's a question from Dominic and then from Angela asking about specific techniques. So one of them is the slant technique, and the other one is being a warm, strict approach. So what do you think of those two strategies?
Yeah, if I take warm, strict, I mean, we've described our behaviour policy as warm, strict. I mean, it's the same as being firm but fair, or any of those other terms. I think if you put this on Twitter now, what is warm, strict, you'll get a whole bandwidth of different views and opinions. And there's some people who've got an issue with the word strict. I think strict just means you have standards and expectations of pupils. It doesn't mean that you're trying to operate like some Stasi prison warden. And the warm, but then underpinning that is a warm element. And I think the best way to describe warm, strict is probably the relationship a parent has with their child. There's a set standard, there's a line you shouldn't cross, but I'm always going to have you back. I'm always going to be there for you as a support mechanism, because we juggle those two elements as teachers all the time. So I don't have an issue with warm, strict, and you can badge it in whatever different term you want. I think it probably means very similar things, but with different terminology. In terms of slant, it's a tactic used and promoted by Teach Like a Champion, and it's used in schools like Michaela. I tried not to name schools in this talk. Again, I suppose with anything, if it works for your context, your school, you've trained your pupils, you've trained your staff, and you know why you want it as an approach, great, use it. If you don't know why you want it, you've just heard about it and you're going to try it for no reason other than just to try it, then it might not work. So it's like with anything, you've got to invest kind of the thinking time and then the actual investment of time on the ground in the school driving something. And I think whenever we bring a change or initiative into schools, the person who's orchestrating the change often forgets that they might have spent 2 or 3 months researching and looking into change X and only give people 2 minutes to respond. And that's massive. You need to give people thinking time and training.
Yeah. What about when you're the tutor of a group? So how can you be strict enough but also get to know them well enough?
Yeah, and I think back to being a tutor, and it's some of the happiest moments, perversely, in my career with being a tutor, because you do inevitably have a different relationship with your tutees, but I do think the principles are the same. I think you need to front load your expectations at the start to your tutees. What you don't want is that, for sake of argument, you've got a 20-minute tutor time every day, that it's like going into a war zone and they're going to try it on with you. I think they need to know that there is a standard and a set level of expectation in that room with you, and set parameters that you are working to. And once the pupils understand that and adhere to that, that's when the relationships can build and really flourish, because they know they're going to see you every day. They will then confide in you, and there's absolutely nothing wrong in that. Obviously, so long as you tread that safeguarding line really carefully, there is nothing wrong in having that kind of closer relationship with those pupils, providing it's obviously a professional closer relationship.
Yeah, sure. Great. So Richard's asking if you have any advice for reintegration of students in term 2 who had to be exited or excluded during term 1.
Yeah, And it's hard, isn't it, at the moment, because we probably can't do the face-to-face reintegration meetings that we would do normally. I would promote, though, that you do a virtual meeting through, say, something like Teams, and you really need to emphasize as much to the pupil as you do to the parent, the expectations of the school, what it is that the pupil got wrong to be excluded, and probably go through the same level of questions you would do normally through any reintegration meeting. But I think also be really clear and absolutely consistent. If the pupil breaks this, what would happen next if they continue with that same behaviour? And then when you bring that pupil back into the school, then I would argue you probably want them on report to you for a period of time to monitor them, to see that they are adhering to the expectations and are behaving in a set way. And I don't think there's anything wrong in doing that.
Sure. Hannah, I thought there was an interesting question here. She's saying, what do you define as poor behavior? Because she says when she asks that question for parents or for teachers or for senior teachers or children, they all have a different answer.
Yeah, and I suppose everybody may well have a different answer. I would argue it's not adhering to your school's behaviour policy, your school's code of conduct, and behaving in a manner that the school doesn't expect, because ultimately the behaviour policy should, if it's worth its salt, be lived and breathed and understood by everybody, teachers, parents and staff and pupils, sorry. So I would argue it's where a pupil is not engaging with that behaviour policy at all, potentially, but even a minor infringement of that behaviour policy, it depends on your level of what you're looking for, can be poor behaviour, because you get the explicit extrovert poor behaviour, which is explosive, and actually that could be really easy to deal with because it's so big and loud, versus that white noise, that kind of chiseling away, that can actually be really destructive, and really that's the difficult one to iron out and stamp out.
Yeah. So I'm going to follow up on that, because there were a few questions about now after COVID classes, because you're not allowed to walk around the room. So how do you deal with these small talks that are happening in the back of the room?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and again, this has been a bit of a game changer in many regards. I mean, first and foremost, because we've had to lay our classrooms out in rows, and that might be different for some schools. I really do feel we've got to champion this idea that the teacher's the expert and the teacher should be respected. And again, this comes from the top, this whole idea of you permit what you promote and you promote what you permit. I would personally have, and we do in my own school, a duty rota of staff that will go around the school to support staff, to check that they're okay, to check that everything's going the way that it should. But I do think if you're going to engage in there's no reason, why you can't still engage in those private interventions by asking your pupil to step outside the room, to stay behind at the end of the lesson, to talk to you. I mean, obviously it depends on the setup of the school and how the school works, but you still can engage in private interventions. You could go the other way, which is to be quite public and vocal, which is, Sam, you're not doing as you should be doing. Let's get on with the work, or whatever strategy it is that you employ. But I don't think those private interventions should just disappear. It's just that the manner in which is probably going to be a bit more challenging than it's been before.
Yeah, I think it's new for everybody, this whole situation. Yeah. Sarah saying that she thinks her students have a very negative attitude to her subject, which then leads to challenging behavior.
Yeah.
So any suggestions on how to tackle them?
Yeah, and that's hard if you've got pupils that don't value your subject. I think something that you've got to, if you could be brave enough to do this, and something, it probably is a brave thing to do, is to talk to the senior management team about the promotion of the subject on one front. So it's tiddlywinks. Nobody likes tiddlywinks. How do we stress to pupils the importance of tiddlywinks and the value of it? Then as a class teacher, it's expressing you could even give a session where you look at where this subject, tiddlywinks, is going to take you in the future. What are the key traits, the knowledge that it's going to give you, what careers are available. And sometimes that's enough to trigger pupils' imaginations to think, actually, yes, okay, I now understand that tiddlywinks, macrame, whatever, has got a real relevance to my life. But that again requires lots of hard work.
Yeah. Okay, so from Keith, there was a moment on your presentation that you said we should be teaching behavior. So he's asking where, when, and how does that teaching of behavior happen?
Yeah, okay. And there's a whole multitude of times that we can teach behavior to our pupils. We can do it through the actual curriculum in terms of the established routines that we might have in place. We could do it through tutor times, through assemblies, through Michaelicon boot camps, but through induction periods at the start of academic years or the start of a new term. So let's, for sake of argument, going into the second half of the autumn term, your school or your department wants to see a particular behaviour exhibited by pupils. You set time aside, and I know that's easier said than done, to train the pupils in that behaviour, to physically train them. I mean, when I joined my school, we deliberately trained the pupils in how to line up, to go into assembly, and how to welcome a member of staff as they go into a classroom by physically role modelling it with every single pupil, and then seeing that it was cascaded across the school, and train the staff in the same token as well.
Yeah, that's good. Let's do one last question because we only have 2 minutes left. It just popped up here from Rebecca. How do you ensure that both subject leads and pastoral leads work together effectively?
Yeah, I think you've got to be clear though, from above, what is it you want those different middle leaders to be doing? Because there's a distinction in the roles, and how much. I mean, this is quite a huge question, actually. From a pastoral perspective, what do you want your pastoral leads to be doing? Do you want them to be driving behaviour and to be driving the pastoral element of the school? Or do you want them to be driving behaviour and then academic outcomes and standards in that regard? And that's where the role for a behaviour lead, it can become enormous and overwhelming. From a middle leader, head of subject perspective, what do you want those middle leaders to be doing? Do you want them to be driving their subject and to be an ever presence for their subject team? Or do you actually want them to be driving behaviour? And I think from my own perspective, I think that becomes a conflict of interest between the two there. But ultimately, in terms of how we work in my own school, we have a centralised approach to behaviour. So my pastoral staff deal with behaviour, while my academic staff, so to speak, deal with the subject element, so that the two things work without being clouded by the other, so that they work really, really well.
Yeah, that's amazing. That was a great answer and a great talk. Thank you so much. There was still other questions, so if I didn't have time to get to your questions, go on Twitter. Can you repeat your profile name, please?
It's at Strickmaster.
Yeah. So go there, and then Sam will carry on with the conversation. And remember to use hashtag SenecaCPG so that other people can join the conversation. Once again, thank you very much, Sam. That was brilliant. I've never seen so many questions on those presentations. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
And I'll see you for the next one, which I don't know when it is, but we'll let you know.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Care.
Have a good evening.
And you. Bye-bye.